All right, everyone. I'm Laura Renner, and I just want to point out that photo was taken about a year and 2 months ago. That's how fast my hair grows. And so, but yes, so I'm a veteran. I'm actually now a reservist, and you can probably tell I'm in a hotel. I'm on reserve duty down in Mississippi. And for our next and final webinar episode, I will be back in Oakland, California. Hopefully, that's the plan. But
Excellent.
so I've started 3 businesses. Freedom Makers is our 3rd business. We're a virtual staffing agency. We pair military spouses with small businesses to support those businesses in running their operations. And that's part of what led the inspiration to this series is, we've helped and we've seen a lot of business owners figure out how to run a remote team because all of our people are remote. And so we've learned some of the best practices over the years by working with our clients on that. And then that led to a great partnership with Sarah. And I'll turn it over to Sarah if you want to share about your experience.
Yeah, so I'm Sarah Skoronsky with EOS Human Resources Consulting, and we work with small businesses who are not ready to have an HR department or an HR person on staff. And the more clients that we're working with, a lot of those clients are starting to be more distributed around, not only just around the Bay Area, but also around the country. And there's a lot of questions, has been a lot of questions about, how do you manage that? How do you make sure that you've got people doing what they need to be doing? And so as Laura said, this was a great partnership because it really is, there is a lot to know, and it has to be very intentional on how you're managing remote teams, however you're doing it, whether it's a short-term or a long-term decision. But you need to be intentional to keep everybody on track and focused.
Yeah, so some of you return attendees may notice that this slide looks a little different. We had been building out this cool 3D looking cone and about how all of our topics kind of build in and support each other to make a remote strong team. And fun fact, there's a limit on how many rings you can put into that particular smart art design. So I came up with a new one, but I do like this one. I mean, I'm sure you guys are all having the same thoughts that Sarah and I had when we first saw it about what this looks like, but I kind of like it because it's all revolving around each other into the center of a remote strong team. And so if you are new to us or you haven't seen all of our series, you can check out, I think we each have YouTube channels where you can see all of our previous episodes, starting with the battle rhythm and then building a culture of trust, figuring out, the legal things you have to keep in mind, having levels of authority and lanes of responsibility, empowered decision-making, smooth workflows, and now we'll talk about effective meetings. And they all come together to have a intentional, as Sarah said, and deliberate remote strong team.
Whoops, what am I on here? All right, so when you're doing meetings remotely, it's important that people know the rules and that they know what is going to be happening and how they're supposed to be participating in that meeting. And so this is really about setting the tone beforehand, setting it during the meeting, and keeping things on track, as we were kind of alluding to if anybody caught the chatter beforehand, and then making sure you're following up and knowing what's going on afterwards.
Yeah, it's really about, it ties into also that culture of trust. It's about how you talk to each other and when you can talk and what sort of language is acceptable even. All that kind of stuff comes in, and you as the business owner or the leader of your team, you set that tone, you set the rules of engagement, even if you don't explicitly say them. And so that's one of the things when we talk about being intentional and being deliberate, it might seem silly or trite, but you want to say, hey, we don't do this or we do that, or, kids are welcome, pets are welcome or not, whatever your rules of engagement are, you want to set them, because when you don't set them, you are setting them.
Right.
All right, so then we'll get into more details around the rules of engagement. And there are 3 areas that we wanted to focus on for today's meeting, and that is setting the purpose of the meeting, the agenda, and the notes. And we'll get into each of those in more detail here shortly.
So when you talk about the purpose of the meeting, really understanding why you're having a meeting, and there's a book um, that I've read in the past called Death by Meeting, and you really don't want to have a meeting just for the sake of having a meeting. We're all busy, we're getting busier every day, and at some point you actually have to get the work done. And so being very, again, very intentional about having meetings for a specific purpose. And whether that purpose is to, make a decision or to brainstorm ideas or to make updates, it's important to know why you're going into the meeting and know what you want to get out of the meeting.
Right. And the purpose doesn't have to be complicated. You don't have to have like a mission statement for,
Yeah.
just, is this a meeting to make decisions? Is it a meeting to, really deep dive into exploring solutions? Or just to just touch base with each other. I was, an example is there was an idea I had that if I were to write it out was going to take like 4 pages probably to type it all out. I don't want to spend that much time typing it out. And, a lot of when you're writing, you lose control over tone and even like visual and body language. And so sometimes it's just easier to communicate verbally. So I just put in 2 lines saying, this is my idea. I'll explain more at our next meeting. And then I use that time to express it in more detail. So that's the kind of like updates you want to think about. Or as we've shared in the past with the remote team, you kind of lose that water cooler talk. So you want to make sure that you're creating space for that, again, being deliberate around it so that you can still have that connection with your team and reinforce the culture of your team, since it's not going to happen organically at the water cooler.
Right. And if you're having regular meetings, depending on how you have meetings, having some time within that meeting built in within that meeting to have that connection time. So like for EOS, we do a daily check-in meeting with everybody, and that's just because we all do the same type of work. And so sometimes we need to kind of pull information off of each other or share information or share ideas or best practices. But the beginning of those meetings is always a check-in of like, okay, where are you at today? And is there any problems, any issues we need to know about? Do you have to take care of your kids today? Are you going to be out of the office at any time? And that personal check-in to just make sure that we all kind of know what the rhythm and the pattern is going to be for the day, because we're not together. So I can't see when somebody goes out of the office or
Right.
has to pick up their kid or has to do something special that's off schedule,
Or just seeming kind of down.
or
Right.
just seeming kind of down. Sometimes there is definitely that, this is a hard time, and sometimes you just need to have some time to say, hey, you know what, you're right, it sucks, and we're going to get through this together.
Yeah. Yeah. A prime example, Sarah and I were laughing last night because I sent an email where it was a 1-word email to Sarah, and I literally just wrote bummer or something. And like, and she had no idea why. She didn't know what I had been working on prior to that would lead me to have that kind of reaction. It was just all I said. And so then yesterday when we were chatting, I was able to explain why I wrote that. But that's a prime example. Like, if her team sends her a 1-word email, she's not going to know the context around it like you would if you're in the office. So having those deliberate times for connection is critical. And speaking of your daily check-in, do you want to share what are the typical meetings you have at EOS?
Yeah, so we do the daily check-in, or I should say Tuesday through Friday, we do a daily check-in where we're kind of working on client issues and talking about things that are coming up, and sometimes sometimes we're just venting or trying to kind of resolve issues that are happening. Once a week, we have more of a business meeting. So that's where we do trainings. I introduce new ideas. We brainstorm ideas. We talk about our goals for the quarter or for the month, and make sure that we're on track with that. And then I do a one-on-one meeting with each of my staff once a month, where it's just, it's not that that's the only time I talk to them one-on-one, but this is focus time where we talk about, what are their goals, what have they accomplished this month? What things do they still need to work on? Where can I help them to continue to grow as a consultant or as a generalist?
Great. Yeah. And so at Freedom Makers, we generally have two types of meetings. One is, I'm sorry, three types of meetings. One is I do have a weekly call with each of the team members, the core team members at Freedom Makers. And that's more like an updates meeting where we're just kind of checking in, getting that, what's it called? The membranous information that's just not worth typing out. And even getting some guidance or decisions that need to be made that just requires a little bit of discussion. But generally, it's more just updates and like sometimes even a little working group to help us move forward on certain initiatives or whatnot, but mostly just updates. Then weekly, the team has a meeting. Again, same situation, but it's all four of us just sharing that sort of membranous information that just, you know, it may be not important enough to write out or too long to write out. So it's just like, hey, just, you know, some good GWIS information to know. And then once a quarter, we have what I call a vision call, and it's where we come together, and that's a long meeting. We schedule up to 2 hours for that meeting, but that's a time where we sit down and we deep dive. What did we think go well the past quarter? What do we want to work on the next quarter? And from that, we develop our initiatives that we want to focus on the next quarter, which then leads to a semi-monthly meeting, part of that weekly operations meeting, where we discuss where are we at on these initiatives, what's our next step to move forward. So we have sort of that check-in meeting, and we have the brainstorming / decision meeting once a quarter.
Right.
And then now we're getting to a point too where one of our initiatives today during our update meeting, where we were like, you know, I think we need a standalone meeting for that just to do some deep dive brainstorming, right? So those aren't regularly occurring, but just it's not going to happen during a progress update meeting where decisions need to be made and things like that. So we generally have two types of meetings: updates that happen every week, and then a brainstorming decision, like vision deep dive call once a quarter.
Right. And probably another one that type of meeting that can fall in here is that working meeting where it's sort of a brainstorming, but it's also like a time when you're really digging in deeper to, like you're talking about those projects and you know, making some movement forward, because you're not sitting next to each other. You're not in the same office. And so
Right.
you need to keep moving things forward, and you know, we'll talk a little bit later about, you know, using those lanes of responsibility, but sometimes you do need to have a time where you just kind of check in and say, okay, here's where we're at. Now you can take the next step forward.
Right, right. And I'll finish up this topic with, I particularly love this image just because I recently heard someone say, you know, the two things you need to use a map, you need to know where you are and where you want to go. And so I love how it has kind of that compass going toward purpose, because if you don't know why you're in that meeting, then you're not going to know what you want to accomplish out of that meeting.
Right.
All right, so next up, I was joking about this with Sarah. Like, I think I put the agenda image loud, so it's like, gets your attention.
Because so often we don't have agendas. We walk into a meeting and it's just a free for all, and you have no idea what you're doing there, and it becomes chaotic, and you can have hijackers come in, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. But it's, you know, you want to make sure that you want to have an agenda going in so that you can stay on topic.
Right, and the key thing is that it's public. It's public so that everyone else knows what they're coming into, right? And so that's one of the things we say, you know, you want it to be available beforehand. What we recommend, like Sarah and I both use Asana, you've heard us talk about it a lot. And then spoiler alert, our next episode and our final one will be around technology and the tools that we recommend. So you'll get to see all about Asana and the other tools we've discussed. But in ours, you know, the agenda is created, you know, I think the week before. I'm not sure when Erin does it, but she does it early enough, and it's public to all of us. And it's actually an assigned task for us to review the agenda and then add anything. So even you know, for our operations meeting today, we were adding stuff throughout the week, and it just gets added to the bottom. And you go in order of the additions. The nice thing about that, when it's public, then let's say I just want to quickly mention, hey, you know, we got this Facebook grant. and we got to figure out what we're going to do with it. But that's going to take maybe 30 seconds or 5 minutes or whatever. But then below that is something that's way more important or urgent for us to discuss. So I might see that, hey, we really need to talk about that. So I'm like, hey, I'm going to skip mine and we'll talk about that next week. Let's talk about this next thing first, right? And so then you have that, because it's public, people can see what needs to be discussed and they can choose, hey, we don't need to talk about this right now. Let's go on to the next thing, or vice versa. And so that's part of the benefit of it being public.
Right. And then the last part of this is about taking notes and making sure that there are notes that are available for everybody to see, and to acknowledge that this is what we talked about. These are the agreements that we came to. These are the tasks that are coming out of this meeting, or action items that are coming out of this meeting. And using a tool like Asana or like Trello or like one of these project management tools as your agenda, that allows you to easily create these things into tasks and assign them to people. And then for people to be able to look at them and say, oh yes, I agree to this, or no, this wasn't what I remember us talking about, and we need to adjust that.
Right. And to add on to that, part of the reason I jumped immediately to Asana is you want to avoid doing this in email, doing the agenda or the notes in email, because if you send out the agenda in email and then someone does add something, eventually you get this long chain. It gets confusing. Which one was the last one? What's the most up to date? It gets lost easily. So when you have something like a project management tool or something that's public, where the changes are made all in one document or one screen, if you will, then that becomes easier to manage, right? And it's the same thing with notes. In the most, what's the word, low level way to describe this would be sort of a CYA thing, right? Like
Right.
After the meeting, you send your notes about you agreed to this and you send it in email, so that way when they don't do it, you can be like, I sent it in email. And even to me, the worst, and you read it because I put a read receipt on it. Okay, but so if it's somewhere public, then everyone can see it and they can say, really, to me, the better way to describe that is that it avoids confusion, right?
Right.
And so when I've studied about effective meetings, they say you should be writing the notes during the meeting, so that you can clear up any confusion right then and there. Like if I think you said you can have it done by this Friday, and you think you said you can have it done by next Friday, we will see in the notes right then and there, no, wait, to clarify, I meant next Friday, or I meant this Friday, that kind of thing. In practice, I have found that's hard for us to keep up with during discussion. We're almost moving too fast to do that. So for us, the note taker publishes the notes after the meeting, but then everyone is assigned a task to go in and review it. And I will say there was a point where I thought people were just clicking that they reviewed it, and they weren't. And so I started planting Easter eggs. Like I'd be like, at this moment, Laura rolled her eyes. And if you read this, then put a rolled eyes emoji in the comment section, right? And then you would know who read the notes and who hadn't. So you can have fun with it too. But I think that's the key thing, is public notes that, to your point, you can create tasks directly from, but then also you have that transparency and that clarity around what people agreed to do.
Right. So in the next section, we're going to talk about our roles and rules. And the first item on here is making sure that the people who are participating really need to participate. And one thing you want to make sure you don't allow is the hijacker to come in, who, again, and if you have an agenda, you can hold to your agenda, but somebody who joins a meeting and wants to take it off topic. And even when we were talking about this and coming up with scenarios, sometimes people don't intentionally do this, but you start going down a rabbit hole, and all of a sudden you're so far off of your agenda and you really need to take the time to kind of back up and pull it back onto the agenda. So making sure that you're staying on topic, and then making sure that people who don't need to be there aren't there. So if, again, there's only so many hours in the day, and we don't want to spend all of those hours working. And if we're doing 8 hours of meetings, when are we actually going to get our work done? So being conscious of that, and making sure that you're aware of how much time are you devoting to meeting time, and do you really need to be in all of those meetings, or can it be communicated in another way?
Yes, I was talking with someone the other day who works in a very large organization. And he had said, I worked 12 hours today and I didn't take a break. I even worked through lunch. And in some ways he was kind of bragging about it. And well, he was trying to like put me down, and I was like, well, all that means is you don't have the right support set up with your team, and you're working too much and not relying on your team enough. And he paused and he said, you're right, I do work too much, but what held me up were meetings. And he's like, I was in 3.5 hours of meetings today or something like that. And I said, well, then those meetings aren't necessary. Why are you going to those meetings? Is there another way to communicate that information? And in his case, the reason why he was going to all those meetings is because he was the one who has to field all the questions. So
Right.
he's going to these meetings because he knows that the other people are going to call him and asking him questions on what was discussed and happened in those meetings. So that's a prime example of where those public notes could be usable. If they are publishing notes of the meeting, then he doesn't need to go. Two, the people asking questions can just go to the notes to ask those questions.
Right.
And that's another thing about the questions need to be on like a master document, or the notes need to be on a master document that everyone can access, right? So that it's always in the same location. Any changes, any decisions are made are in the same location. So there's no confusion about where to go or where to find the latest information. And so that might be something, right? If you're having too many meetings, that's something where explore how you're disseminating information in your organization. And is it necessary that it needs to be disseminated verbally only through a meeting?
Right. And again, there's so many tools that you can use, and we've used, we've talked about Asana as a tool, but even within things like Slack and Teams, there are ways to document things and have that available where everybody can see it, and you don't have to then talk about it in a meeting, because you've got everybody, you've put it out there, and people can mark off that they've acknowledged and read it.
Right. And then to just round out, what we were talking about with necessary attendees, right? There tend to be, in my mind, two types, maybe three, right? One is the hijacker, which is it, and it might, like Sarah said, it might not be intentional. It might be intentional, but it might be they've been trying to get a hold of you and they can't. So they come to this
Right.
meeting, and maybe they're invited to this meeting, but they're like, while you're here,
Yes.
can I ask you about this, this, and this? So they basically just hijacked your meeting. Or they're going because they think they need to be seen. And so then it's wasting their time. So then again, that rules of engagement and the culture of your company, like, are they going there just for FaceTime? And therefore they're wasting their time and your money being there. And so how are you setting that up to where only the people who need the information or who need to make inputs are there, and everyone else is getting that information in other ways? And someone once suggested too that on the meeting invites, they invite the people who are necessary. And then I guess in Outlook, there's a way to make someone, and actually in Gmail too, there's a way to make it optional. So then it's more like, if you're just interested, you're welcome to come, but you're not required to come. And that helped them break away from that FaceTime requirement, that implied FaceTime requirement, where people were going just because they thought they needed to, or they needed to know it. So then in case their boss asked them about it, right? But
Right.
then if they're listed as optional, then that gives them permission that, hey, you're welcome to come if you're interested, but you're not required to come.
Right.
Mhm.
So the next item is about rotating hosts. And this is really good because it makes everybody accountable for that time. And it can kind of keep things compact, because people are going to once they're in charge of it, they're going to make sure that they have the information, that they know what's going on, and that they're engaged in the meeting as well. So you don't have people who are showing up and drifting off or anything, because they know that they need to know not only what's going on now, but next week or next meeting they might be in charge of that as well.
Right. And it helps them to appreciate the work that goes into preparing an agenda, preparing the notes, and just um, so then it makes them more engaged when they're not the host, just like Sarah was saying. So.
Right. Um, and then when, in terms of regularly occurring meetings, make sure that you're only doing that if it's absolutely necessary. So if it's something that doesn't need to be done, if it's a brainstorming session, you don't need to have a regular recurring brainstorming session. But things like checking in with employees one-on-one, that's something that you do want to set up so you have that cadence, you have that rhythm where they know they have FaceTime with you, and can talk about how their role is expanding, or things that they need help with.
Exactly. Exactly. And then assigning duties. So this, in addition to host, having a note taker, having a timekeeper, that also fits into the rules of engagement, right? Which I know we have rules, but that's that tone we were talking about. Because if you don't set a timekeeper, then it's going to be harder for someone to interject and say, hey, we're going over time here. But if you set that permission ahead of time, like, hey, you're the timekeeper, you have to hold us accountable, saying, hey, we've got 5 minutes left, or, hey, we've got 10 minutes left, or, we're over time right now. Like, when you set that ahead of time, then it gives them permission to interject and say, we're running short here, that kind of thing. And same with note taker. When you have a centralized person, then they're there, and then they have permission to say, wait, I missed that. Can you say that again? Did you agree to this Friday or next Friday? So that they're capturing those notes accurately as well. So it's just part of that, setting that tone. When you have those ahead of time, they have permission then to speak up when they need to.
Right. And then the last one is about stating whether video is required or not. And this is important because there's so much that happens visually. When you're just talking to somebody, you can't see if they're slumped over, or if they look like they're confused, or they look angry about something. And so it's important to decide at the beginning of the meeting, and make sure everybody knows whether video is required or not. And there are some situations where if they don't have enough bandwidth, maybe they need to turn off video in order to even stay on the meeting. But if not, make sure that people are participating and are actively engaged, so that they're not distracted, that they're paying attention. You're trying to make the meeting as efficient as possible already, and the last thing you need is somebody to be wandering off and thinking about something else, and you can't keep the meeting rolling on.
Right. And a couple of notes to add to that, um, when it's just phone, it becomes harder to communicate for a couple of reasons. One, as we've discussed, right, something like 60 or 70% of communication is body language. And you lose that on the phone. And so then, and also just the way the phone systems work, people cut each other off, they talk over each other, and it's not they're doing it on purpose, it's just the way the technology works. They don't hear the other person. So then they'll just talk over each other, and it makes for a less effective meeting. So when you have video, you're able to see someone wants to interject, or they're starting to talk, so then maybe you hold back, or it allows for a more natural conversation. And then again, you can get that body language. The other point I want to make is I feel like, especially on Zoom calls, that video is like when you go into that, I'm sure that scenario is well known, where if you go into an elevator and you stand facing the back, then eventually everyone else will turn around and face backwards, right? It's just something about the way humans interact, our social interaction. And it's the same thing with video. Like, if one person turns off their video, eventually everyone starts to turn off their videos. And then it becomes really awkward when you're the only one on video. You kind of feel like everyone's watching you, right? And so, but then that's the thing, is you as leading the company and the tone of the meetings, if one person starts to turn off their video, then everyone does, and you're degrading that communication, that body language communication. So you want to, again, that goes parts of the rules of engagement, indicate video is required, with limited exceptions being like low bandwidth or something like that, or maybe you know, it's a crazy kid day or something, you're like, hey, I need to step out, and giving them, you know, the expectation that they have to say why their video is turned off or something like that. So you want to be more deliberate and intentional about video in your meetings.
Right. And so the next thing we're going to talk about is some of the alternatives to having an in-person meeting, because there's so many alternatives. We mentioned a lot of them already, that you don't necessarily have to take, you know, half an hour or an hour of time to have that conversation, when it can be done just as quickly or as efficiently when you're using something like a project management tool. So if you're using Asana, you're using Trello, any of the other myriad of project management tools, and you're using them effectively, a lot of that communication can happen right there within that system. You can do updates. I've had full conversations, you know, with our clients. We use Asana that are with our clients, and on a weekly basis, we're working through issues, and somebody will post something in our weekly meeting, our weekly call project, and we get notifications about it. And before the call has even occurred, we've already resolved that issue because it's come up, we've answered it, we've done the background, we've gone in, we've checked it off, and we don't even have to discuss it on the weekly call because it's taken care of. And so then that gives us time for us to dig into things that we do need to discuss, like employee management and some things that really need to be talked about, versus these, you know, check mark task list things that are just like, okay, yes, this is one and done, and let's move on.
Mm-hmm. And you know, related to that are chat tools like Slack or Teams. And part of the reason, you know, anyone who knows me knows that I will rail against email. Like, that's my soapbox. If you want me on a soapbox, ask me my opinions on email, and I will talk to the cows come home. And so the things like Slack or Teams, or even the chat ability within project management software, helps reduce the amount of noise going back and forth in email. Because the way I see it is, I tend to view it as like text messaging, but with subject lines and with ability to mark as unread, right? So I'm sure a lot of you have gone through that, where you're doing a group text with your team about a certain issue, someone brings another issue in, and now you're responding, but then there's confusion, because are you responding to this issue or to this issue? It just gets confusing. So chat tools like Slack or Teams, or even within certain tasks within Asana, you're able to have that quick, fast, rapid fire discussion like in text messaging that email just destroys. And then, but you're able to do it in a way that's organized, that is closer to email, but also more efficient than email as well. And so if you're able to just do those quick fire discussions like that, then that oftentimes reduces the need for a meeting and speeds up the decision process.
Right. And a lot of those tools have the ability to keep a thread, so you still have a record of that conversation going back and forth, but it's just about that one conversation. You don't have the things that are, you know, kind of butt in from either an email or from a text message. I can't tell you how many times people pull up an old email from me and then send me a new message about it, and it just throws everything out of control. I'm like, hey, this has nothing to do with that. And so being able to go back to search on those things, to respond to them, that makes it really helpful to use those type of tools.
Right. Fun fact, Slack is actually an acronym that stands for Searchable Log of All Communication and Knowledge.
Well, there you go.
How cool is that?
That's exactly what it is. Although I don't like Slack. I'm a Teams person, but you know, everybody has their own preference, and that's the important thing, is that you just have to find what works, you know, and whatever works for you is what you're going to be comfortable with.
Right. Quick side story. Today we were having a meeting and we were discussing where we should a new sort of project tracker, which software should we put it in? And I said, you know, I personally would rather us put it in Asana so that everything is in one place. On the other hand, that information is going to be coming from Streak, so maybe we should keep it in Streak, and it's something that we'll need to discuss. And it was so funny because Erin brought it up, And immediately everyone else is like, Asana. I live by Asana. It has to be an Asana. Or I don't do it. And I was like, that makes it an easy decision. And so, because part of it too, what I was saying was, right now, the four of us might have our preferences, but we want to also make sure we're setting it up for when we're scaling and we have more than
Right.
just the four of us. So, that was something we were taking into consideration as well,
Right. Right.
which in some ways is a good segue to our last point about having
Kind
defined
of a crooked road, but okay.
defined lanes of responsibility and levels of authority, because when it's clear what needs to happen and by which position, not necessarily by which person, right? That's how I brought it back. then then also they're able to make decisions without a meeting. So and that was a previous topic about having those defined lanes of responsibility and levels of authority, so they know, okay, I can make this decision because it's in my lane and up to my level, and then when I hit that level or when I cross over that lane, that's when I might need to have a meeting with someone else to discuss the decision for how to move forward. And so we had that happen last week. The team was having a meeting and they've gotten to a point where like, okay, this is as far as we can take it. We need to now raise it to me. And in fact, they raise it to me through Asana. We have not had a meeting about the issue. We're going to do a deep dive for more brainstorming, but they were able to raise it to me without a meeting. And so that was an example of having those defined lanes of responsibility and levels of authority to reduce the number of meetings required, because
Right.
the decisions were made.
So, so as we wrap up on meetings and understanding that this is all, it really does take a lot of intention, and this is all kind of wrapped up together. This is really kind of our last major topic for the remote strong. And as you said, and we'll talk about in a minute, our next topic is kind of digging into the tools that we use to do all of these different things that we've discussed over the last couple of months now. And I did want to just add in here that a lot of the information, specifically on the meetings that we're using here, is actually from a book called Distributed Teams by John O'Douin. O'Douin.
Right. Oh, yeah.
O''Duinn. And it's a great book, and I actually recommended it to a client recently who's just using having their teams be distributed more and thinking about expanding that beyond this current situation that we're in. And it really gives a good foundation for that, specifically around meetings and around making sure that you are keeping people engaged and using them appropriately. So I just
Right.
wanted to give that book a plug there.
Yes, thank you. And that is a good point that brings us back to our very first one about battle rhythm and about being intentional and deliberate, right? Because even when we're through COVID and we're having a hybrid team, when you have a hybrid team, you always run the risk of leaving out your distributed team members because people are making decisions in the hallways.
Right.
And by having something like this set up where you're having effective meetings with agendas and notes where all the decisions are captured in a central place, then that reduces that risk of leaving out those distributed members because they're able to access that information publicly without having to attend that meeting.
Right.
And it just becomes a habit where you don't make decisions, or if you do make them in the hallway, you're posting them in that master notes area.
Right. And keeping everybody informed of what those decisions are.
Exactly. See, it all fits. We all bring it in.
It did. We pulled it all back together. So as always, we have our packages that we have available for offer. I am still doing the pandemic policy package. This is the FFCRA policies that you need for your employees. It also includes a consultation with one of our consultants who will go over the policies, make sure that you understand what your requirements and responsibilities as an employer are. We're starting to get a lot more questions about people who have gone back to work and now they need to take time off either to take care of their child or because they've contracted COVID themselves, or somebody they know has contracted, somebody in their direct family has contracted COVID, and the employers need to know what to do. And this tells you what to do. So if you would like to purchase this, you can go to go.eoshr.com/COVID. And that is for people participating in this, it's at $99. And at the end of Remote Strong, that price is going to go away. So make sure that you get that before July 23rd.
How crazy, how fast it's gone, I feel like.
It has.
Yeah. And then for us, we're offering a battle rhythm review, and it's what I have found is that it's really what you want it to be. We go over your current battle rhythm, your current workflow, or if you have gaps you want to discuss, and we can help you brainstorm on those gaps. But so it's really kind of been whatever the people are looking for. Like if they want to review their systems and see where their gaps are, or if they know what their gaps are and they want ideas on how to fill those gaps, it's pretty flexible. That's like my key word is flexible. So if you're interested, there's the bit.ly link right there, or you can just point your phone's camera at the QR code and it will take you to the form for that to go ahead and schedule that review.
And in 2 weeks, we will be having our last Remote Strong episode, and this will be on amplifying with technology. So we will be taking a dive into the technology that both Laura and Freedom Makers and myself with EOSHR are using, and how we're using that, and be available to answer some questions about different ideas around that. So again, you can register using the link on the screen or using the QR code for that.
And I'll say, as I've said all along, but I'll just keep saying it. And we choose the word amplify for a reason, right? If you don't have good battle rhythm or good workflows, technology is going to make it worse. If you have good battle rhythm workflows, meetings set up, technology is going to make it better. And so we'll kind of go into that more deeply at this final episode. Series finale.
We'll wrap it all up.
Oh my gosh, you made that sound so exciting, Laura. Okay. Anyway, let's get back to effective meetings. There is actually a couple questions here. How do you get yourself invited to a meeting that you really think you should be at in your organization?
Good question. You could hijack it. I'm just kidding.
Well, I think that if you have an agenda item that you think is specifically need to address, taking that to whoever the meeting organizer is, and letting them know that you need to get on the agenda for that meeting and ask to be included in that. Again, it's one of those you if they're not asking you, maybe they don't understand why you need to be there, and so it's important to communicate to them why it's important that you participate in that meeting.
And I will admit, my immediate thought, I went to the bad place where it could be a reflection of the culture of the company, where they're either excluding you on purpose or because they're not thinking about it. And so you really do want to keep in mind the culture of that team. Where do you need to have someone else go in and advocate for you, maybe your boss or your mentor, someone saying, hey, you really, this person really needs to be a part of this meeting. Can you add them? Or if you can do it directly yourself, that's great too. But just keep that in mind about the culture of the company and find a way to get in, which I guess doesn't really answer the question, but if there's a way to get invited, either by going directly to the host yourself or finding someone who can advocate on your behalf, depending on the culture of the organization.
Right. That's a whole other rabbit hole we could go down about, dealing with the culture and being kind of stonewalled because of that. And so unfortunately that does happen.
Yeah, I was reading an article about a case study about the Challenger crap. Was it Challenger? The one that happened in 2003, about what happened. And basically a critical team that monitors damage to the space shuttle was left out of a standing meeting, and they were supposed to be included, but culturally, the two different factions didn't, like, the one faction that was running the main meeting didn't want them in there, and because of that, that critical information wasn't getting received by them. And so, can you as one person fix that? I'm not sure, but you know, those are just some ideas, like going to the host directly or finding someone to advocate for you to get invited to that meeting. And then once you're there, not hijacking, but being able to demonstrate your value so that they'll continue to invite you.
Right.
No, that's good. That's a good answer. Somebody went in the chat here, and I thought this was interesting. Not sure I want to ever go back to face-to-face meetings. Zoom forces people to keep it short and brief.
Yes. Yeah. And you can wear Zoom shorts.
Or you could not wear Zoom shorts if you want. It's really up to you, right?
Right. That's what I saw this meme, or no, they call them Zoom shirts. It's Zoom shirts where, like, that's the thing that's presentable to everybody else. And it was like a meme of some guy in like a button up and a tie and boxer shorts. And so people have this Zoom shirt that they put on just for the meeting, which this is my Zoom shirt, right? And so
you don't need to see anything more than that, Laura. Thank you.
Right. Well, I think because our logo's on the back, and I remember when I had these made, it just made sense for it to go on the back, except no one can see them. But from just the design or whatever. But
yeah, not on Zoom they can't.
Well, and you know, whoever said that you know, that warms my heart, right? Because we've been 100% virtual for the 5 years we've been in business, so it can be done, and it's exciting to see that this could be a culture shift in American workforce, in workplace culture, where you can work from home, and then that means you can live anywhere. And just how freeing is that? How liberating is that?
Yeah. I still have some diehards out there. I had some clients who are like, no, as soon as we can, we're going to go back to in person. It's like, okay, but you can still get so much done when you're virtual. So
one thing that has come up with a couple of my clients in regard to meetings with their team and whatnot, and is, you know, kind of that fun factor of water cooler meeting. And do you guys have, I don't know, I feel like trying to help my clients, I've come up short. You know, I've planned virtual trivia nights. Do you have any input on that, where it's just not so much, you know, getting the business across, but just, you know, that camaraderie?
You know, it's funny you say that. I actually came across an email today that had, and I like read it for a second, so I don't remember the name, but there are now companies out there that specifically create these events or these engagements for virtual teams. So they do virtual team building. They do they kind of create an agenda for you to do something that's not work related, that's just about, you know, getting to know each other and building that camaraderie.
Yes, one of those is a company called Greater Good Games. The founder is Shui Chen, Shui, and she actually is having a virtual birthday event this weekend. And so, but she does that. She does remote team building, things like that, and it's just really fascinating stuff. Also, I would also say read the room, right? I was hanging out with some friends a few weeks ago, socially distant, and one of them was like, I don't want to drink with you in person, and I definitely don't want to drink with you on Zoom, right? And so, like, and like a couple other people joined in, like, yeah, I see enough of you. I don't want to see you again, right? And so, and these were people who had employers, and they were like, my boss tried to hold a happy hour, and I did not go. And so, you know, you want to definitely read the room on that. I think, you know, Jenny, you and I were joking about people going to mandatory fun events in person, right? And how people don't really want to go to them. So it might be just sort of reading the room. In fact, I remember suggesting we hire a comedian to come in and talk to us just for a few minutes. And you guys were like, no.
Yeah. Yeah, it has to be something people are interested in doing. But the name of the company is called Confetti. Withconfetti.com is the company that does these virtual team events. So.
Oh, that's cool. I love a good pivot during these times, and I think that's cool when the entrepreneurial spirit. I think there is a need for it, especially with the team building, because I think that would be something that would be lacking. So
And I think
no.
it was maybe Zapier or one of these technology companies. They actually showed that they have Slack channels that are specifically like around hobbies or for fun. So they'll like, you could have a meme Slack channel and just people just post funny memes in there. And it's a way to sort of also build that camaraderie that's lost when you're not in person, right? Or I think they had one about dogs. And so then, you know, they would come on Zoom and everyone would show off their dogs on the Zoom, and it would be like a for fun meeting, you know, no agenda, no notes or anything, but just a chance for everyone to show off their pets or whatnot. And so, you know, you can create those in ways where people who want to participate can, and then you're not requiring it. But I would also say if you're the leader of the team or the owner, you know, you definitely want to make sure you're checking in, right? And so like with us, Jenny, I don't know if you noticed this, but in our one-on-one meetings, I always ask how you're doing, and I make sure to actually talk about it, not just to, I'm good, how are you? Like I always ask each one of you how you're doing and kind of go deeper into what you're doing, like the small talk things. Like you and I are really good at, we have a lot of small talk in our calls, but we still get everything done within the time limit that we have set for ourselves. And so.
No, that's good. That's true. Like giving that personal time, just, you know, 5 minutes sometimes. I think that's a benefit. Well, good ladies. That is it for the questions that were asked in our Q&A. And so just another great session. I'm really kind of excited now for this tech tools one, even though I know what's coming because I've the process. But
you use them all, don't you?
I know, right? I'm going to encourage, and I'm actually the one in the meeting today that was like, Asana, I live by it. So I'm going to encourage everybody, please join us in 2 weeks. I think it's like all going to come together. And I think it's going to be a benefit for you. So,
and I'll just add, we finally remembered to add the contact us information.
Oh yes.
That was a gap. That was a gap in our battle rhythm that we finally remembered to add.
Yes, so you're always welcome to reach out to us.
Yes, and ask questions anytime. But anyway, please stay healthy, and we will see you in 2 weeks.